One thing that I've had to try to understand in the grand scheme of building a MVC application with Cake PHP is where to put the business logic. Now, in a normal model view controller setup, the logic would go in the model. The problem is that with Cake PHP, it can generate the various files for your application. If I were to change the table structure, the model would then have to be updated. Now, this could be done manually. However, it is easier to do it using the bake command that is offered by CakePHP. Now, what does that look like? Well, here you see I ran bin, cake, bake, model sequences, no test, and force. What this does is that it regenerated the table class, the entity class, and the fixture class for the sequences table. Now, the problem with putting your business logic inside your model with a framework that works like Cake PHP is that if you were to regenerate that model, you would then have to restore your business logic and or your methods that are outside of what is automatically generated. So I didn't want to have to deal with that. So how did I go about that? Well, what I ended up doing was to add another layer to the MVC architecture in Cake PHP. Now, this is unconventional, but it works, at least in my case, and works for my setup in terms of ease of maintainability. So I added a service folder, and if I collapse this, you'll see that inside of the source, I have a service folder that is at the same level as the model and controllers. So in there, I have grouped each of the service classes. Note, I say service classes and not service methods. I've grouped service classes by their respective entities. So if we come and take a look at sequences, I have a add, delete, and edit command for each of those, and then a get by show slug query. Now, when you look at CQRS, granted CQRS is for event-driven architecture, I kind of followed that patterning of things. So the commands make some sort of change to the system. A query only pulls data from the system. Now, why is that the case? Well, when it comes to a query, you may get something different. You may get a single result, you may get an array of results. It just depends. So what I did was to create a query interface that has a execute method that does not specify a return type. That way I'm able to return, I'm able to use this interface, but return whatever is necessary to be returned, whether that be a sequence, a show, a user, or a list of users. You get the idea. Now, when it comes to running a command, the command interface still has an execute method, but it specifies that every command that is ran will return a command result. And that command result basically has a few things defined in it, whether the request succeeded, failed, any data that needs to be returned back, and a message. Now, this message is displayed on the user interface. However, this message could also be written to a console if you are using the built-in Cake PHP or you're creating a Cake PHP command. That being said, so each of my commands or each use case gets its own command or query. For this example, the sequences edit command, and I prefix whatever entity followed by the action and whether it's a command or query. Now I have a base command class which currently does not have any common methods in it, but my base service class does have these two methods in it so that they can be used in both queries and commands if necessary. And then we have the command interface, which I've already shown you. Now, the way I've set this up, granted in CQRS, you typically have a command and a command handler. Likewise, you have a query and in some cases a query handler. But in my particular case, what I did was to set up the commands and the queries to accept the necessary values via the constructor. Now, I don't have any validations here right now, but at some point I could validate these things in the constructor or validate them at the top of the execute method and throw an exception or exit early if necessary. This way, I'm able to do each use case in a single file. And in my opinion, this is more organized because of the fact if you want to find how to, or if you need to make a change to, let's say, the sequences add, you're not having to go to the controller to then make adjustments there and then go to the model to make adjustments there. You then just come to the sequences add command file, and everything related to adding a sequence is in this file. Now I have a couple of public methods here, and I think let me show. I think I have one here. All right, so here's a better organization of how this can be done. So everything in this file is related to editing a sequence. Now this is significant because, like here, I have a subroutine. So I have my execute method, which is defined in my interface, but then I have a subroutine that says to reset the PSA, and this will actually reset the flag that is set on a given sequence, so that if let's see, here we are. So if somebody selects that this sequence that they're editing should be the PSA sequence for that show, then this will reset all of those and then set this to the PSA only. Now, the reason this is significant is because any subtask within this larger task could then be broken out into its individual methods. So if we come back over here to, let's see, I think I have one in users, and user password reset, or reset password. All right, so I have an execute method here that does a number of things. It's getting based upon the reset token and so forth. But it also does first time setup. So if you meet the criteria here where the show is null, but you're resetting the password, we want to basically do an initial setup. And so this first time setup is here. Now, all of this where it's doing and creating a status object, this could then be another subroutine that is broken out into its own method. Likewise, I have another method here called add show, and if we scroll up, so you do the first time setup, and inside of the first time setup, you do the add show. And so you have a series of methods that are being called to perform a larger task, but it's broken down into subtasks. So that is another benefit, at least in my opinion, of using a use case driven class instead of a use case driven method. Now, you're probably thinking, well, why not just do a traditional service method? And I could. However, I've seen how service methods, or excuse me, how service classes can get very, very long if you have a number of use cases. And for that reason, I decided, you know what, I'm not going to do it that way. I'm going to break each use case into a separate class. So using this here, so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This doesn't count because it's a base class, but I have 6 methods in under users, or that can do 6 methods that can do a operation related to a user. Now, in a service class, that service class, if you take the length of all of these files, and let's see how many lines are in here, just out of curiosity. So let's navigate to the source service users directory. All right, and if we do WC-L, all of those, so we got 3, yeah, I don't know how to do that without, there's a way to do it. All right, so 327 minus 14, because assuming the base is not really doing a lot. 327 minus 14, that leaves, I believe, 313. So we have 313 lines. In a single class, that would be a lot. Now, granted, you have a number of use statements at the beginning, so that number is probably just around 275 to 300 instead of over 300. That being said, though, that was a lot going on in one file, and if you really want to consider the solid principles, specifically the S, which is the single responsibility, each class in this particular setup has a single responsibility, meaning if I need to change how the adding of a user is done, guess what? I'm not changing a service class that has multiple methods in it. I'm changing essentially a command class that is doing one thing. And so in that pull request, it would only be one file in that pull request, assuming all the logic that needed to change was in this command. So this is a different perspective of how to organize a MVC project. In my opinion, like I say, it makes things a little bit easier to maintain when each of these use cases are in their own file. On top of that, if I ever needed to change the model and needed to rebake the model as typically done in Cake PHP, I can do that without risk of losing the code that I've already put in place. Now you're probably saying, don't you use version control? You could just restore it. And that is true. However, the easiest way to do it is to redesign things or set things up in a way so that you're not having to regenerate the file and then roll back part of the file that accidentally got deleted. Because if you accidentally commit that and push that, now your application is broken, and that's not a good thing. Thank you for watching. Comments or questions, leave those down below. As always, please be sure to subscribe and follow, and see you in the next video.